Okay, so I didn't really expect to be talking about this movie or even watching it, to be honest, and it kept being advertised to me on Amazon, and I was trying really hard to ignore it and not talk about it, but you guys, I'm sure, want me to talk about this, and so many other YouTubers have been discussing it. And I thought, you know what, I'll give it a try, because I was such a fan of the original Cinderella and all of the adaptions too. I'd watch every single one. I was so passionate about all of the movies, and fairy tales in general have really shaped me as a person, I think. So they're really important to me. And a lot of people were saying that this movie, this modern 2021 adaptation of Cinderella starring Camilla Cabello, was really awfully done. And people described it as having fake girlbossery, and it's meant to be the first feminist Cinderella, but instead came across as very patronizing rather than empowering. When I heard people saying that, I knew I had to talk about this movie, because I'm also really passionate about feminism. So this is like the perfect thing for me to discuss, because I've always been so passionate about women's rights and equality and all that stuff. So how interesting that they've tried to really lift women up and elevate women. Cinderella's taking control of her own life, but yet they still manage to screw up and people are still unsatisfied. Like, how could you do that so wrong? I just wanted to see for myself whether it was true or not. So that's what we're talking about today. But before we get into it, make sure you subscribe and click that notification bell, and then also you get all notifications. And I've got a cute little Cinderella get up today, little outfit. I'm really sick of garbage TV. We had His or That come out recently on Netflix as well, which has Addison Rae in it, who's a TikToker. Normally that wouldn't bother me if maybe she was always passionate about acting in the film industry, but she cannot act to save her life. And everyone was telling me to watch the movie and review it, but I saw a few trailers, and from that enough, I just could not do it. It was so bad. And that one did really well on Netflix, and you could tell Netflix did it because they were like, well, she's really famous and well known and famous names there, so they can get bums and seats, they can get people watching it regardless of whether the actors they choose are actually actors. It just makes me sad. I think over the past even 5 years there's been this real degradation of quality, and like recently we had TikTokers going to the Met Gala. That's how I've been feeling at the moment. So I knew this was just going to be yet another bad movie where no thought was put into it, no depth was given to it, and it was just going to be something really shallow. I am such a fan of Cinderella and always have been, and that includes the fairy tales and the movies. So seeing it butchered like this actually hurts my soul, and I think my younger self would have been really disappointed if I'd seen the movie come out when I was younger, you know, because compared to all the other Cinderella adaptions, this one is so bad. It's like, well, why was it made then? Because it's not needed. It's not bringing anything new to the table. It's not impressing me. It's not doing something really unique. So why is this being made at all? We've also had just too many Cinderella adaptions, and there are so many fairy tales and stuff out there that are really lacking good content. Like, we're yet to see a good live action of The Little Mermaid or Thumbelina. Why don't we make that? Why are we doing yet another Cinderella? We've had like 6 by this point. It doesn't have that spark to it that really draws you in and makes you feel like you're living in the fairy tale yourself, where it brings out that kind of childlike romantic part of you. Honestly, all the other adaptions I watched did that to some extent, particularly like Adams Enchanted and the 2015 Lily James adaptation of Cinderella. They're so much more enchanting than this, which is a real shame. So there is this narration right at the beginning, literally introducing the characters and the story one by one, which was one of the most silly things I've seen in a long time, because sometimes narration is necessary, but not for a Cinderella adaptation. Everyone knows the story of Cinderella, and narration's there to actually explain things we might not be able to infer ourselves, but we all know the story of Cinderella. We don't need someone to explain it to us. I felt like I was a child, and I know the demographic for this movie is a bit younger, but still, like, it's treating the audience like we're stupid. And I'm sure even kids, to be honest, don't need the narration, because they 100% know the story of Cinderella, the plot, and it also means that everything is spelt out and there's no room for nuance or subtlety or subtext. I could not stand the script in this movie. And something I've realized as I get older is there's really no point striving for perfection with stuff or doing something 100% right, because I know a lot of people that say they're aspiring to be authors or directors, and they hold themselves back a lot. They have a lot of limiting beliefs, and they say, I'm not ready, I'm not perfect yet, I'm not quite at that level of skill I should be to be taken seriously. And I used to feel the same way about myself too, like, oh, I'll do YouTube when I'm more confident, I'll do it when I reach this certain milestone. But what's so dumb is you shouldn't wait to be perfect at something before you finally do it, because these writers who've written this movie that's done so well on Amazon and stuff and has so many famous names in it, people who signed up to do the project, it's terribly written. It's so bad, but they didn't allow that to limit them. Honestly, anything can get published. Anything can be made into a movie. Like, we've had so many books on Wattpad, not the good ones, the terrible ones, like After, The Kissing Booth, that are really terrible. And they were made into these huge box office hits with some really famous actors. It's giving me a bit of a crisis. What is going on? I feel like, oh, Hollywood wasn't like this 20 years ago. It was different. Let's talk about the romance aspect, because Cinderella is partly a romance. When Cinderella is first introduced to the prince, it was probably the worst introduction of two love interests meeting each other I've ever seen. Oh, it was so bad. She's watching this big ceremony take place, and the king and the prince are up in their palace on the balcony talking to all their subjects, and Cinderella's just another face in the crowd. But then she sits in this statue, and the king yells at her to get down because he doesn't want her sitting on it. She makes this really cringy joke about not being able to see properly and needing some bleachers or something. She makes a lot of weird faces throughout this movie. It's very strange. That is the moment where the prince just gazes at her and he's like entranced by her. And this is the guy who doesn't fall for girls easily, apparently, to the degree that later when he's talking to his father about the ball, he says, I'm more than happy to have a ball as long as anyone can be invited, because he's that desperate to see Cinderella again. He was so taken by her, and I don't see what she did that was so amazing and so incredible. It made so much more sense to me when I looked at the meet cute in the 2015 Cinderella, which I thought was done so well. I really enjoyed a lot of aspects of that movie. It wasn't perfect, but it was very good. And especially the meet cute, because she's riding on this horse without a saddle going really fast. So he's already like noticing kind of her wildness, I guess, and her bravery in that moment, just inferring all this stuff about each other without even needing to talk to each other. And they're already like intrigued by each other, wanting to know more about the other person. And then when she's telling him that they shouldn't be shooting stags and they should just let the animal live its life, it just shows like what a beautiful person she is to care about the animals so much. A love at first sight, love at first connection kind of story where it actually made sense. Whereas in this movie, the Cinderella 2021, she hadn't done enough to warrant a reaction as strong as his reaction was. If they want to make Cinderella this feminist thing, that's fine, but have the romance actually be worth it. And if you're not going to do the romance well, honestly, just cut it out. You could just have her be friends with the prince. Additionally, this movie is also almost apologetic or embarrassed to be romantic, like it's something to be ashamed of maybe, or something that they're trying to dismiss as not too important, almost rejecting the romantic aspects of the original source material, more from Cinderella's point of view, because she's like, I should really prioritize my career and not this guy, because if I'm with him, I can't pursue my dreams to be a fashion designer. And Cindy doesn't even seem that keen on the prince. She barely notices him at first. She's like, oh, whatever, I've got to go do my own thing. And as a result, it kind of made me feel like we're making romance into this weakness or kind of a lame thing. Even the fact that she doesn't go to the ball because she can't wait to see him again and she has a crush on him. She goes to the ball more to kind of pursue her designer dreams and stuff. But I honestly felt like if you're going to include the prince, it's okay if she wants to go to the ball to see the prince again and be his friend or something, or date him. Like, it's okay to have her go to get to know someone better. Like, I wouldn't have been too bothered if they made it like that. I just don't think you need to make romance into this kind of bad thing. And often in the past, romance movies were very much centered around a woman not knowing her worth and stuff. So it's like now with these modern movies, we're really overcompensating to the point that now romance is actually being pushed to the side and not written with the care that it deserves and not taken seriously. And there are a lot of inconsistencies with kind of the moral of the story, because one of the main themes I could actually get behind is this idea of don't choose a guy or a girl over your career, because they might not stay with you, but your career will. And that's something Cinderella says is, I don't think I can be with you because a queen can't be a seamstress, but I really want to design stuff, so this isn't going to work. But then later, right at the end of the movie, the prince's like character arc, which wasn't even a character arc, is that he says to her, I never even really wanted to be king anyway. I wasn't really into that. What I actually want is you. So I want to choose us, and I'll step down. I don't need to be king. My sister can rule, and that way you and I can be together. So what he's kind of doing is choosing her. That really clashed with the whole, what I thought was going to be like the moral of the story. So it just left me very unsure as to what this, like, why was this movie made? What was its intention? What was its message? Why would he not want to be king? He could make so many really powerful changes, and he could affect so many people's lives for the better. Maybe it's not all of our dreams to be like prime minister or something, because that's a lot of pressure and it's a very high intensity job. But I found it odd that he was so willing to dismiss what could be actually a really beautiful opportunity to do good things for the world. So in terms of Camilla herself, she's a good singer, but it didn't really fit the rest of the singers' voices or like the sort of tone, and it sounded very auto-tuned at points, which I found odd because I thought she could sing quite well, so I don't know why she'd need that much auto-tune. And there was one part, I think she sang the reprise of Know My Name, where she was imagining herself in the future as this kind of designer, and she sang to herself, and her voice sounded really like screechy and out of tune, and I think maybe her voice just cracked or something when singing, but they didn't refilm that. Why wouldn't you refilm that? It sounded really bad. Her acting was fine. There was no like problem. It really lacked some complexity and depth, and when I look at other versions of Cinderella, like Lily James, Anne Hathaway, Hilary Duff, Selena Gomez, Lucy Hale, I feel like they all combined, like every single one, even on their own individually, did a way better job and just matched the role of Cinderella better. That's kind of embarrassing to admit, but I think they did. Another one of Cinderella's key kind of character traits is that she's really passionate about being a fashion designer. I have very mixed feelings about this. I like that they gave her a hobby and an interest, and that is uplifting in itself, to give a woman a hobby outside of her love story and her kind of abusive situation. It's nice that she has her own interests. That's great. A fashion designer is quite like a cliche decision. It's the first thing I would think of, like, what's Cinderella's job? I don't know, fashion designer. Like, it's very obvious. And also at that time, women were oppressed in so many ways, like in that time period. But the one thing that would get the least amount of judgment is if they wanted to like be a washerwoman or be a seamstress or be a designer. Like, that's the most likely relevant job for a woman to have. You wouldn't really be like laughed at to do that, whereas you would be laughed at if you wanted to be like, I don't even know, a wood chopper or something, or doing something that men consider a man's job. So it was a bit lame that she's doing something that's meant to be all like taboo and people challenge her, but in reality no one would be that bothered if she wanted to do stuff involving fashion, to be honest. So they could have given her a hobby that was a bit more actually controversial. She kind of does these weird, like I said, facial expressions and jokes throughout that make it seem like they're trying to have her come across as quirky, relatable, not like other girls. I could sort of see it happening. It was just a little sprinkle. It wasn't that much, but I did notice it. And it's like she's not taking herself seriously and she knows the whole thing is just a movie. And also her main character trait is like being clumsy, tripping over stuff, which I wasn't a fan of either because, again, a bit lame. And she's meant to be a designer, right? But the clothes she designs aren't even good. Like, they're not nice at all. They're very cheap and childish. And the dress she wore at the end was beyond hideous. And the dress that she wore to the ball didn't stand out. It wasn't different in like style or anything. So that was a bit lame, especially when you compare it to Lily James as Cinderella with her huge grand entrance, and the dress she wore didn't even fit properly around the bust area. The one scene I thought was kind of funny was when the prince says that he's going to give up his crown for her as long as he can be with her. It's a huge thing to suggest, right? And she'd feel kind of like responsible for him almost, or like she was pushing him to make such a huge decision. So she pauses for like a split second, like, wow. And before she's even had a second to think about it, he interrupts and he's like, oh, silence it is then. Assuming she's rejecting his offer. It's like, no, dude, she needs more than 2 seconds to process it, you know? But then she ends up agreeing to it and she kisses him. And then, I mean, it was quite a cute scene. I did like it because they start immediately complimenting each other. Like, that was the most romantic moment of my life. Oh my God, me too. Oh, you look so handsome. It was quite funny. And then he tried to do this huge romantic gesture by picking her up and carrying her onto his horse. At multiple points, the humor in this movie was extremely poor and they were trying to use it to carry the movie, but it wasn't good. But in that one scene, I thought that was actually quite funny and quite lighthearted and cute. But the rest of the movie, the jokes the characters made would fall flat 80% of the time. They were really bad. Like, they were so awful. In terms of other characters, with the fairy god person, I think they were meant to be non-binary. I'm pretty sure someone involved in the film said that. I really liked sort of their energy around Cinderella, and I liked the idea of making the fairy godmother or godfather someone unexpected, someone who you wouldn't think it would be. I don't know, it's like they were sort of very like stereotypically written, and it felt a little bit insensitive somehow, just because they were so like one-dimensional. They were just sassy, fun, and that was kind of it. And I wanted a bit more of a connection between them and Cinderella, and more of like a development in that relationship, and maybe give them some backstory and some development, rather than their whole purpose being to elevate her and prop her up, because that seemed to be what was happening, which I didn't really like. And also, it's just the way the whole scene was constructed. It was really bad. Like, Cinderella doesn't even seem surprised they appear. She's just like, oh, hey. And in terms of the stepsisters, honestly, like I said, it's kind of the same way. Their motivations are really shallow and thin. Like, why do they hate Cinderella so much? Is it just because the stepmother tells them to? You know what annoyed me too is Cinderella is primarily, aside from a romance, aside from the magic, it's primarily a story of a girl coming of age in this really toxic household where she's treated really terribly, and she's emotionally and even physically abused, and she's neglected, right? And she's exploited and treated as a servant, and she has to rise out of the ashes and create her own life. That's clever, rise out of the ashes. Cinderella, cinders, no, terrible, no one will get that. If you don't get the part, and you'll be like, okay, what? But that's the whole point. That's what I love so much about it. That's why Cinderella is a story that is so dear to my heart, right? Because so many people can relate to that. But it kind of detracts from that meaningfulness when the stepmom really isn't that bad. She's quite comical. The actress who plays her is so gorgeous and charming. And as a result, it kind of takes away from the potency of the movie and the, what's it called when, like, cathartic, how cathartic it is at the end when Cinderella finally escapes and she finally makes a name for herself. It's hard to like have that emotional impact when the situation doesn't seem that bad in the first place. Like, it's the weirdest thing compared to the other adaptions, because she's not that mean. You don't see her or the stepsisters continually going out of their way to sabotage Cinderella. Maybe when she's working on her designs, them coming in and like trashing her studio, and her day and night working for them and bringing up their meals. You don't see much of that. In fact, a lot of the movie Cinderella out in the village, and she seems actually quite independent and stuff. And I just think that's a bit of a shame, because it kind of misses the point of what Cinderella's supposed to be at its core. I remember in like the first Cinderella cartoon, there are so many scenes of her just cooking, feeding the chickens, bringing food up, doing the washing, and you see how much she's used. In fact, one of the stepsisters even asked Cinderella if Cinderella thought she was pretty, as if like she needed Cinderella's validation or something. And I was like, what is this? I thought I'd briefly compare this to some of the other versions of Cinderella as well, to sort of give you an idea of why this one just, I can't even compare it to the others. It's just at the bottom of the ranking. So let's talk about Ella Enchanted, because that's probably my favorite Cinderella adaptation aside from the Lily James one. So in Ella Enchanted, what I liked about it is they actually were doing something different with that movie rather than making it the kind of Cinderella we've seen a million times before. Cinderella has this curse put on her, which means that she has to obey people all the time, no matter what. And it highlights this theme from the original cartoon of Cinderella being exploited and having no voice and being powerless, especially because she's quite feisty actually, and she was very opinionated, and that's why I like her so much as well, because she reminds me a lot of myself. I wear my heart on my sleeve, I'm very expressive, I'm very opinionated, and I was like, oh, it's so nice that, you know, we're similar and stuff. I could see myself in her, but she is forced, despite that quality, to just do what people want her to do all the time, and she can't actually say no. So when it comes to things like consent and stuff, it gets very, very shaky very fast. And her mum wanted her to keep it a secret because she was terrified at the thought of anyone finding out and using Ella. Now, was Ella Enchanted fully feminist? I think Ella as a character was done really well 90% of the time. I thought she was actually a really feminist character. I haven't watched it in a while, so there may be some things I've missed, but I just remember thinking that she was really doing her best in a difficult situation. She was very kind and she wanted to help people, and you could actually see her actively doing that. She was being forced to kill the prince, but she was obviously in love with him, and so this was upsetting her. And with her willpower, and it was basically the power of true love, right? She managed not to stab him and to finally break through the curse. And what annoyed me about that is it's sort of like, oh, the power of true love cures all, because that's what it was. And what kind of irritates me too is it's like the need for a man for that kind of romantic love, and that's what will cure you. Because there was this other girl, her friend, who she was forced to not talk to anymore, and Ella in that situation couldn't find the willpower to stay friends with her friend and to disobey the curse. She couldn't. So apparently the platonic love wasn't strong enough, but then when it came to the prince, she could. So I didn't like that very much. But aside from that aspect of it, a lot of the other elements of the film I thought were done really well. Also, the movie has like such a fun, magical, wonderful feel to it, from like the characters, the really cool costumes, the set, and the whole idea of Ella and the prince going on like a little road trip adventure together on their horses, and the ogre kingdom. Like everything was just so cool to watch compared to this one, which just doesn't draw you in the same way. Even with the Cinderella story, yes, it was very modern, involving like technology and stuff, but has some kind of feminist elements too, I would argue. I still enjoyed it more than this movie. And with just Enchanted, which was a movie with Amy Adams in it that had a lot of elements of Cinderella in it, that's probably one of my favorite movies of all time. Because I remember the first time I watched it, I was on a school trip, I was on a bus, then someone put the movie on like right at the front of the bus while we were driving, and I just remember being absolutely transfixed by it. Like I was not distracted at all. I could not tear my eyes off it, and I was like, what is this movie? I was just in love with it. So it has such a place in my heart, especially because a lot of the movie is around our main character Giselle learning to break through her naivety about the world. Naivete? Her like innocence about the world and her sheltered attitude, and realize that it's okay to live in the real world where you feel a whole range of emotions and things aren't going to be perfect all the time, rather than her staying in like her fairy tale kingdom. And she even like goes to save her love interest from the dragon at the end of the movie. Again, not perfect, but really cool. And Cinderella with Lily James was good in the sense that they really nailed Cinderella's gentleness. Like she's not loud, loud, she's not obnoxious, she's actually just a victim in her situation, but managing to stay kind and compassionate throughout it. And I like that because often with a lot of like live action adaptions and movies nowadays, they often try to diminish the femininity, humility and gentleness and grace and maternal qualities are kind of stripped away and then replaced with very, very like hyper masculine qualities, and it can get quite messy. So I liked that they kept her being very gentle, and she is quite passive, like she doesn't do much to try and like get out of it or anything, but at the end of the day she is like a victim. And her relationship with the prince I thought was actually sweet and done well. Same with Ella Enchanted, it was cute, some issues there, but just so much better, leaps and bounds ahead. Same with like Giselle and Patrick and Enchanted. I adore those two. I think they're such a good couple. When you look at the original Cinderella, the first Cinderella movie, she is kind of quite, I guess you could say, passive in her situation or unable to escape, and you could view that as not good enough. But honestly, I think people are too hard on her. The girl was having a hard time. I don't know how she could have escaped a situation anyway. It's not as simple as people think it is, you know, but it's the fact that there's so much strength in her vulnerability. Yes, she may not have been like, I don't know, stabbing her stepmother or something and jumping out the window or doing anything crazy, but when she wanted to go out to the ball, it wasn't to chase the prince. She didn't even know that she'd like him. She just wanted to go to the ball to have a nice night and to let her hair down and be someone else for a bit. And then she just happened to meet the prince while she was there. She liked him, but she didn't even know he was the prince, and then she just went home and that was the end of it, you know? So it is more progressive than people think it is. And when her stepmom locks her in a room, she's actually trying really hard to get out, and it's her animal friends that help her escape because she forged those alliances by being kind to those animals, and because of those connections she made, that's what allowed her to be able to get out and stuff, which I thought was a really cool message. So it has a lot going for it that I think this 2021 Cinderella kind of just didn't get. And also in the first Cinderella, another reason why it's hard to like blame her or victim blame her is because you see how evil her stepsisters and Lady Tremaine are. They are terrifying. Like Lady Tremaine sat there in this huge bedroom with like this massive velvet bed with these hangings, and she's sat there stroking her cat. They tear at her dress with their bare hands and they rip off her necklace, and it's really like distressing to see because it's a violation of kind of her physical space and her body. And when you compare that to like this remake in 2021, it's just so shallow. It doesn't even touch on like the issues that are kind of talked about in Cinderella. This one doesn't stand out to me as anything more progressive or like empowering than any of the other Cinderella adaptions I talked about. And when Cinderella in this one gets ink thrown in her dress, all that happens is her stepmom grabs her by the ear and throws a bit of ink on her dress. That was it. There was no sort of ripping of clothes or anything like in the original, and the ink stain wasn't even that bad. And I thought it would be an opportunity for Cinderella to be a bit less passive, and she's a designer. I thought she could impress everyone by whipping up her own dress in 10 minutes or something and then heading to the ball. But she couldn't. She needed the help of a fairy godmother. She needs the prince's help to get to her meeting because she just can't do it. She needs him to help her get there. She needs the fairy godmother's support. She was trying to sell her dress and couldn't find like a way of marketing herself for people to like her. So she needed the prince to do that for her and give her a leg up in that way. Not that much has changed. And even in like some of those earlier adaptions I talked about, even if Cinderella like couldn't escape her abusive situation or whatever, the point was that like despite all of that, she was still so compassionate and loyal and loving. Whereas in this movie, I didn't even see examples of Cinderella just being a genuinely good person and like going out of her way to do good things for others. So she didn't even like have it going on in that department. And she doesn't even manage to like change the laws involving being a queen who could still have her own career and be like a seamstress or something, because she doesn't like push the king to change his mind. The king changes his mind. He's the one that makes that decision, and he's like, oh, maybe it wouldn't be so bad for the prince to do blah blah blah, or maybe it wouldn't be so bad if I made that other girl the queen instead. Like, he's the one calling the shots on stuff. And at the end of the movie, Cindy, whatever her name is, even says that she doesn't need the title of princess, which kind of made me sad, because it's okay to want to be called a princess. She was like, oh, we don't need to label it. You can just call me the Princess Love. Don't you want to be a princess though? Like, it's not a bad thing. And in terms of like the other female characters, they're not really that impressive. A lot of them are just very one-dimensional stereotypes. The princess sister, she wasn't just like this girl who really wanted to be queen and do some good things. She had those qualities of leadership and stuff, but she was actually incredibly annoying. And like with the queen, she's actually quite a cute person because she seems like a real human and a bit more layered. But even with her, I just felt bad because she's trying to talk to the king about the problems in their relationship, and there are some really deep rooted issues there, like the fact he doesn't listen to her enough and stuff that maybe you could bring into a wider conversation around the patriarchy or men not listening to women and respecting them or whatever. But the problems are just kind of skimmed over and then wrapped up and solved so easily. Like I said, the original source material is around Cinderella needing to escape her abusive environment and spread her wings, get out of the cage. That's kind of the theme, and that's like the target. But in this one, Cinderella, her primary objective is to get her dream of being like a designer seamstress person. Why can't it be both? It seems like she wasn't particularly bothered about escaping from her family at all. With kind of the demographic of who this movie is aimed at, like people in America and the UK and stuff, we know at this point that it's a good idea for women to have a career. I feel like the movie was trying to be all impressive and woke, like, oh my God, isn't this awesome? Women can have a career. But we were kind of learning about that and getting educated about that concept about 20, 30, 40 years ago. Like, we were already having that journey then, so it feels very dated. So overall, my thoughts about this movie, did I enjoy it? I liked a few songs. I liked the song that the prince did with those women at the ball when they were talking about wanting him or something, and they were like, oh my God, we want him. I just thought that was kind of cool and well done and actually fit the scenario really well. And I was quite impressed that when Cinderella did her dance with the prince at the ball, they sung that Ed Sheeran song. And normally I don't like that song, but with the way they harmonized it and stuff, I actually liked it. So that's quite impressive, I guess, that they managed to make me really like that song. Aside from that though, with the rest of the songs, they weren't very good. Like, they were really bad. If you compare it to Frozen, for example, where they were writing their own songs with meaning and they're just very good, and like a lot of other musicals and stuff where the songs are just excellent, this falls so flat. It's like they were doing karaoke and covers of other songs that have been done before. And when they sang Somebody to Love, copying Ella Enchanted, which did it, the problem is that Ella Enchanted did it way better. It wasn't very good. Like, the humor fell flat. So they screwed that up. They had some big names in it, like James Corden or whatever. So what? Those characters were just annoying and didn't need to be there. It was too long. It could have been cut down by like 20 minutes. It was boring. And I hate how they're trying to modernize it and appeal to like the Twitter generation, Gen Z, like the modern viewers. What do they want to hear? By popping in all these cringy slang words they think teenagers use. We see this happen all the time with Fate the Winx Saga, with Riverdale, where these shows are trying way too hard to appeal to kind of a teen audience. Cinderella's talking to the queen and the queen says, that's fine, I'm a freaking queen. Did they say the word fabletics? They might have. And clout? I was like, I'm done. I'm done. I did not come to watch Cinderella to have like these words thrown around. It really makes me uncomfortable when movies do it. It also has this very strange, almost 1980s outdated kind of cinematography, you know, camera angles and set even. Like, it's very obvious it's like a movie set. It was very strange, and the special effects and CGI were terrible. And I don't even normally notice that stuff or care, but I noticed it in this, like really poorly done effects and editing that I actively noticed because they were so bad. It's so weird. Normally I'm not fussy again with like the choreography and cinematography in dancing scenes and the songs. Like in a musical, I don't notice that stuff, but I noticed how weak they were in this and how low energy and just bad they were. Like the song the prince did with the choir dancing around him, I thought was so bad. Like, why was there a choir there with him? What is this? Modern hits, like top 10 hit songs, they don't often fit the actual context of the scene, or they don't have any emotional impact. So yeah, I've been ranting for a while now. I got very heated. I felt very heated, especially I think it just hurts me a little bit more because I am so passionate about fairy tales and Disney movies, and they were such a big part of like me growing up and then seeing these live actions. I know people were really angry about a lot of things that happened with Mulan, the live action, which I haven't seen and I'm not sure I want to see because I'm not sure I could bear having it tainted again. Oh, it's so frustrating. But let me know what you think in the comments. I would love to have a chat about it with you guys. Make sure you follow me on Instagram, and I will see you guys for my next video. Mwah.